Hey guys, how are you today? I'm your host, Kendra, and grab a seat, turn the lights down because I'm about to tell you a story that's been hiding in the shadows for decades. It's about a 19-year-old girl named Arlis Perry who, in October of 1974, went to pray at a Stanford University chapel, but she never came back. The next morning, her body was found inside the church, and let me tell you, the scene was chilling, something out of a nightmare. Not only was Arlis's life really taken, but the way she was found raised a lot of questions about ritualistic motives. And for years, no one had any answers, and this case went cold until DNA evidence finally helped reveal a twisted truth. It's a story of heartbreak, confusion, and a mystery that wouldn't be solved until decades later. If you're ready for the chills and twists, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is a graveyard shift. Let's rewind and take it back to January 15th, 1959. That's when Arlis Perry was born in North Dakota to Charles and Catherine Perry. She grew up in a small town, and let me tell you, she wasn't your typical small town girl. She wasn't the type who would just daydream about California beaches and living the dream. Instead, Arlis had something deeper in her heart. She was sweet, kind, and most importantly, super religious. We're talking a girl with a heart of gold. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but those who knew her best said she had this quiet, almost reserved vibe about her. But don't be fooled, because when she spoke, you could feel the warmth, the kind of person you could trust without a second thought. She was a girl who would always listen, the one you went to when you needed someone to talk to. Like a lot of us, Arlis had big dreams. She wasn't just going with the flow. She was enrolled at Stanford University, working toward becoming a nurse, because she wanted to help people, make a difference in the world. She was dedicated, focused, and she knew what she wanted. But let's be real for a second. Just because she was all about her goals didn't mean life was easy. She was just like the rest of us, trying to figure it all out, juggling friendships, classes, and of course, love. And that's where Arlis Perry enters the picture. Now, I gotta tell you, this sounds like the start of a romantic comedy, right? Arlis, a sweet small-town girl from North Dakota, meets Bruce, a former football player at Stanford, and sparks fly. He had this natural charm, the one that makes you go, yeah, okay, I see you. They didn't waste any time before they knew it. They were practically inseparable. I mean, can you even imagine two people just hitting it off like that? Things got serious real fast, like dating to get married fast. They were this picture-perfect couple. She was this quiet, warm soul with big dreams, and she was clearly head over heels for her. So what did they do? They got married. In a simple ceremony, nothing too flashy, just about the two of them, their love, and their future together. Arlis was 19 and Bruce was 24, a young couple full of hope and plans for the future. Everything seemed perfect, right? Arlis had just married the man she loved. She was working toward her nursing career, and honestly, her future looked bright. But we all know how it goes. Life doesn't always play out like we expect. And in October 1974, everything was about to change for Arlis in a way that no one, especially her, could have ever imagined. So we're at October 12th, 1974. Arlis Perry, our sweet, quiet, small-town girl from Dakota, is just having another typical day. Going to class at Stanford, doing her thing. But here's where things start to go sideways. She and her husband, Bruce Perry, had a little argument. We don't know exactly what it was about, but let's be real, couples fight, right? That happens, but it seems like this argument was a catalyst for what was about to happen. After the argument, Arlis tells Bruce she just needed some space, a little time to clear her head. So what does she do? She goes to Stanford Memorial Church to pray. Now, this church is open 24 hours a day, so it wasn't like she was walking into an unsafe situation. She was just a girl looking for peace, right? But here's where it gets creepy. Bruce wasn't worried. At all. He thought she'd just be gone for a little while, but he wasn't expecting her to stay out all night. He didn't think much of it, which honestly is a little weird to me. I mean, if my husband went out and didn't come back by morning, I'd be freaking out. So the next day rolls around and Bruce wakes up to find that Arlis is still missing. No calls, nothing. Cue panic mode because I'd be freaking out. He goes to the church to look for her, but she's nowhere to be found, so he does the responsible thing and contacts the police. And this is where the story gets absolutely insane. So October 13th, 1974 is the morning after Arlis goes missing, and honestly at this point everyone is starting to freak out. She hadn't come back from the church and no one had heard from her, so here comes the janitor just doing his usual rounds at Stanford Memorial Church, just minding his business, probably thinking about what he's gonna have for lunch later, when he steps inside and walks towards the back, toward the chapel area where Arlis had been praying the night before. And then he finds her, but not in the way anyone expected. Arlis is lying there lifeless in a horrifying state. Her body is found neatly arranged, like it's been set up, almost as if she was just sleeping there. But we know that's not the case. This wasn't a peaceful nap. This was a crime scene, and the brutality of it, you can't even begin to imagine. Arlis's body is partially undressed, her underwear pulled down, which immediately suggests she'd been sexually assaulted, but hold up because it gets worse. She's been strangled with a blood-stained rope, and I don't know about you, but when I think about being strangled like that, it feels incredibly personal. Like the killer was making sure she suffered before she died. The blood around her body, it was a mess, and I mean that literally. Blood everywhere, splattered like she'd been bleeding for a while. It was messy, violent. The way the blood pooled near her head suggests she wasn't just killed quickly. It was brutal. And get this, there's a candlestick placed near her body. I don't know about you, but who in the world arranges a candlestick next to a victim like that? It just felt off, like the killer wanted to make this scene even more twisted, almost like a sick form of ritual. Oh, and the church doors, they were locked from the inside, so whoever did this knew she was there. They were planning it. It's like they knew exactly where to find her, and they set the whole thing up like it was a scene out of a nightmare. Can you even imagine being the janitor walking in and finding that? You're probably just thinking you're gonna sweep up some dust, and instead you walk into the most disturbing crime scene imaginable. I can't even fathom the shock that he must have felt. Like, I would have lost it. Now, the police come in and they're immediately stunned by the brutality of it all. But here's the thing, there's no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing. It's like the killer just waltzed in and waltzed right out without leaving a trace. The scene was so clean, it was like they were invisible. The positioning of Arlis's body, the candlestick, the blood, and that rope around her neck, everything about it felt so calculated, so personal, like the killer was making sure that this wasn't just some random act of violence. This was something planned, something with a purpose. The brutality of the scene sent chills up everyone's spine. And let's be real, the fact that Arlis had gone to the church to pray, to find some peace after an argument with her husband, and instead ended up violated and murdered, it just hits different. It's heartbreaking, it's disgusting, and it's just wrong. This wasn't some spur of the moment thing. This person knew what they were doing, and they did it coldly without hesitation. Alright, so now we get into the investigation, and I'm telling you, this is where things get messy. Like really, really messy. Because after Arlis was found, you think that the police would jump right into it, right? This was a brutal crime in a church of all places where someone could have easily been spotted, but nope, things didn't go as smoothly as you might expect. So here's the first major problem. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Zilch. The doors were locked from the inside, and there was no evidence that anyone broke in, so the police immediately started thinking that whoever did this might have known Arlis or had some kind of connection to her. Makes sense, right? If the killer didn't have to force somebody in, maybe they were just, invited in, or maybe they're already there. And that leads us to the first person of interest, Bruce Perry, Arlis's husband. Yeah, that's right, her husband. I know, you're probably thinking, well, they were married, how could he be a suspect? But all true crime fans know that the husband's always the first suspect in the wife's murder, especially after they have an argument. Now, when the police started questioning Bruce, his behavior was, let's just say a little odd. He was visibly upset, of course, but his reaction seemed kind of off. And the more they dug into his background, the more they started asking, is there something more here? Apparently, there was a bit of tension between Bruce and Arlis. You see, they'd had some marital problems. Nothing super crazy, but there were reports that they'd argued the night before Arlis disappeared. And while arguing with your spouse isn't exactly a red flag on its own, things started to get a little more suspicious when they found out that Bruce had a history of violent tendencies. particularly with anger. But the thing is, Bruce was cooperative with the police. He went through questioning without getting defensive, so the investigators didn't immediately have enough to pin anything on him. They didn't have solid evidence, so they just go around, they didn't just go around accusing him left and right. Still, he was very much on the radar, especially since no one else was seen entering or leaving the church that night. But let me say, it gets weirder. I'm talking about some major inconsistencies that came up in the investigation. For one, the police couldn't even get a straight answer from witnesses who were around the church. Some people said they saw Arlis that night before, but then there were others who couldn't confirm anything. And then, here's a kicker. One witness even said they heard a car driving up to the church just before the crime. But there was no description of the car, and it was never really looked into. I mean, it was literally the only clue, and nothing ever came of it. Like, what happened there? And it gets even worse. The police found out that Bruce had an alibi for that night of the murder, so he was cleared. He wasn't involved. But honestly, the whole situation still didn't sit right with a lot of people. Was he just lucky, or was he really innocent? And was that enough to say someone else didn't do it? The investigation was just all over the place, especially when you consider how little physical evidence they actually had. I mean, they had that bloody rope, the blood, and the candlestick, but that was it. No fingerprints, nothing that pointed directly to someone specific. And back then, DNA analysis wasn't even possible, so they would have had to rely on good old-fashioned detective work. And let me tell you, with the police constantly playing catch-up with leads, people started to get frustrated. The media was all over it, putting pressure on the investigation. The media coverage went wild with stories about the crime running nonstop. The public reaction, it was a mix of shock and disbelief. This was a brutal murder in a church, for crying out loud, and people just couldn't wrap their heads around it. And then there were rumors, of course. People were talking, speculating, you know how it goes. Oh, maybe it was a random attack, or maybe it was someone who had a grudge against her. No one knew what to think, but they were all glued to the story. And there were even rumors that Arlis' death wasn't random, that maybe it was part of something bigger. Some folks thought it might be related to the cults. The Satanic Panic. I mean, I think it started after this case happened, but I'm not sure. But related to the cults in the area at the time. But again, there wasn't a shred of evidence to back any of that up. Eventually, they expanded their investigation and looked into a couple of other people of interest. There were rumors about a man who had been stalking Arlis, and there were some odd reports about her being seen talking to a strange man the night before her death. But again, no one could confirm anything solid. And you know what I mean? It's frustrating when there's so much speculation but no clear answers. The investigation seemed to just stall out. No solid leads and no one getting arrested. And to make things worse, after some time, people started to wonder, was the police department just not taking this seriously enough? Were they missing something big? For real though, how do you go from this brutal crime in a public place to basically no progress? It left people questioning everything. Who did it? Why did they do it? And was it just a random act or something more calculated? So here's the deal. The investigation kind of stalled for a while. I mean, a really long while. A man named Stephen Crawford was questioned early on, but never really got that close of a look, from the police. Because, I mean, how could they know back then what they were dealing with, right? So fast forward to 2018, and with the advancements in DNA technology, the authorities thought, let's give this thing another shot. So they went back to the crime scene. Remember, Arlis was found brutally murdered inside of the chapel, and they re-examined the evidence that had been collected back in the day. Alright, so let's break this down because it's actually pretty wild. We're talking about Stephen Blake Crawford, the security guard at Stanford Memorial Church, who, believe it or not, had been a suspect for years, but for some reason the investigation never fully panned out in the 70s. Yeah, here's where it gets kind of crazy. The DNA left at the scene matched Stephen Crawford's DNA. I mean, think about that for a second. They finally got the match after all these years. His DNA was found on Arlis' body, and they did a thing was called forensic comparison, DNA testing against the sample that they had, and the match was there. Now, this is where things get even crazier. Crawford had died back in 1978. just a few years after Arlis' death. He was already dead when they made the breakthrough. Talk about a gut punch, right? You finally have answers and you realize the guy who did this isn't even around to face the consequences. And I'd be pissed. But here's the thing. Did Stephen Crawford ever confess to the crime? Nope, not even close. This guy never came forward. He didn't leave any confession behind, and he didn't give anyone the satisfaction of hearing him admit to it. So while DNA linked him to the murder, he never got to answer for his actions. And to make matters worse, Crawford was still working at Stanford when Arlis was murdered. He was a security guard at the church where Arlis was found, and no one knew what was happening in the shadows. I mean, can you imagine? Like, this guy was supposed to be watching over the place, and instead he was hiding a deadly secret? So there you have it. The case was technically solved in 2021, but since Crawford was dead, it kind of leaves a bitter taste. And DNA came through, finally giving Arlis' family the truth they deserved, but no confession and no justice in the way it should have been served. It's like the worst kind of twist in a crime story. Answers falling, but no closure. Now, here's where it gets even more bizarre. So remember the guy, David Berkowitz, his Son of Sam killer from New York? Yeah, he somehow gets involved in the story. Just stay with me here because this one is one of the creepiest parts. So in prison, Berkowitz started sending out letters, and in a few of them, he mentioned the Arlis Perry case. But here's the thing. He suggested that he'd heard the details of the crime from someone he referred to as Manson 2. That's a whole other can of worms, right? Now, some people thought Berkowitz might have been talking about an occult connection or a potential copycat killer. But when investigators talked to Berkowitz in prison, nothing. He had nothing to offer them. But get this. Investigative reporter Mari Terry found something weird. Berkowitz had mentioned Arlis Perry's murder without being asked. He wrote in 1979, Arlis Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California at Stanford University. Okay, now here's where it gets even weirder. Arlis' best friend and Bruce's mom had been calling a fraudulent phone number under Bruce Perry's name, and this led to some major confusion. Arlis herself even wrote about this mix-up in a letter to a friend. She said, "I had to laugh about your call to Bruce Perry. Mrs. Perry made the same mistake. She called him too, but the strange part of it is that his name is not only Bruce Perry, but is Bruce D. Perry, and not only that, but it is Bruce Duncan Perry, and he attends Stanford University, and he just got married this summer. One thing, his wife's name is not Arlis. Why was someone on campus using a fake phone number for Bruce Perry? Was this person stalking Arlis? And if so, was this linked to her murder? None of these theories can be confirmed, though. We'll never know for sure because Crawford took those answers to the grave, but at least Arlis' family finally got some closure after decades of waiting. So alright friends, that's the story of Arlis Perry, a case that shook Stanford to its core and left so many unanswered questions for decades. Was this a ritualistic killing? Was Crawford part of something darker? Or was it just a twisted predator who saw an opportunity and took it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was it something bigger or was it just a crime of opportunity? I want to hear your thoughts. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the little bell so you never miss a new video. If you love true crime, creepy stories, and strange cases, stick around. There's so many more stories to uncover. But until then, stay safe, make good choices, and I'll catch you guys next time on the Graveyard Shift.